to tonight's webinar, Supporting All Learners in Accessing Complex Text. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but while you're waiting for the beginning of the webinar, there are a couple of things that you can do. The first is we have a few handouts that we'll be referencing on tonight's webinar. You can access those on the Handouts tab on your control panel, and so you could spend a little bit of time downloading those and have them ready to go. And in addition, we have a poll that we'd like you to take. Just curious how many webinars you have all been on in the past. So please take our poll and download the handouts, and we will be with you in just a minute or two. Great, so thank you to all of you who took our poll tonight. It looks like most of you have been with us for 1 to 3 times, including perhaps tonight. And we have a few people also who have been on 4 to 7 webinars, and even a few people who have attended 13 to 15 webinars, so that's great. We're happy to have all of you here tonight. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So we are going to begin with introductions this evening. So on the webinar tonight are your hosts from the Field Impact team, Sandra Alberti, Janelle Fan, and myself, Jenny Beltramini, and Linda Nguyen. Also, we have a couple of guests with us this evening. Carrie Swanson is a Student Achievement Partners literacy specialist, and Carrie actually is going to be joining us tonight via pre-recorded video. She was unable to be on the webinar in person, but you will all still get to hear from her this evening. And then we have a core advocate guest, Adrian Williams. So core advocates, who are they? Our webinars were started to extend and support our core advocate network and the core advocates that are doing this work around the country. So core advocates are educators who believe in the potential of college and career ready standards to prepare all students for their futures. They are eager to support their colleagues and engage with their colleagues and communities in understanding and advocating for the standards and standards-aligned instruction, and they understand and embrace the instructional shifts and assessment required by the standards. To learn more about the Core Advocate Network, or even to join the network, you could contact me or my colleague Joni Funderburk, and our emails are on the slide. And also, we'd love for you to complete our Core Advocate survey. That way you will be in our database and be a part of our mailing list and get more information in the future about upcoming webinars and Student Achievement Partners events. And you can learn more about the Core Advocate Network on our website, achievethecore.org. As always on our webinars, we encourage you to engage with us and the presenters and the other attendees via Twitter. Please tweet using the hashtag Core Advocates, and the Student Achievement Partners staff and our guest Core Advocates Twitter handles are here on the screen. And just a little bit about webinar protocols. If you haven't been on one of our webinars before, you'll need to know that you can access the documents and the handouts that we reference on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen under the Handouts tab. During the webinar, we'll be engaging with all of you through questions and polling, and so you can use the question tab or the polling tab also on the control panel. And after the webinar, we will be in touch with you. You will, in addition to getting access to the recorded webinar and all of the materials in an email, we will also be sending you a survey to follow up with you on how you were able to use the information in the webinar tonight in your own settings, in your classrooms, and with other educators. So we appreciate you filling that out and letting us know how you have been impacted by this content tonight. So my colleague Sandra is going to talk a little bit about instructional advocacy.
Thanks, Jenny. So this is Sandra Alberti, and we always like to spend a couple of moments on these webinars to kind of tell you a little bit about our network here at Student Achievement Partners. So our Core Advocate Network is a network of educators that's really focused on an element of this work that we fondly refer to as instructional advocacy. The concept being that in order to advocate for improving education, we feel strongly that educators need to first start off with a really good understanding of what is it that we are trying to achieve. And the way we talk about it here at Student Achievement Partners is really a firm understanding of the shifts themselves. And with that firm understanding, then, educators are in a really good position to support their colleagues, promote resources, use tools, and ultimately create learning environments in which our ultimate goal is met, which is that students are developing knowledge and skills that support them in college and careers. So that's kind of what we are all about here, and it's really how we measure the impact of our work. The events we have, the efforts that we make is mainly to say, did you have the information that actually helped you make a difference, whether that difference is in your classroom, whether that difference is with your grade level team, a school, a district. Some of you belong to really well-connected networks, and all of those are places that you can flex your instructional advocacy muscle, if you will. And because this is really the important part of our work, the way we measure ourselves and the effectiveness of our own work, we ask that you help us kind of track those things by filling what we promise is a very brief questionnaire about what it is you did. And so this is really just telling us, who you are, what you are, what activity you participated in ultimately, and then what is it that you took back to your classroom. How did you take this from a concept to an action? And we have the link here on the slide at achievethecore.org/educators-taking-action, and this is always available. You can take this often, whenever you do something, and it's just a nice way for us to get some feedback on what is actually going on in the schools across our country. So we appreciate your willingness to help support us in that way.
Great, thank you, Sandra. So the goals of our webinar this evening are to unpack and help everybody understand why it's critical for all students to work with and learn from grade level appropriate complex text. Then we will talk about strategies that you can use for scaffolding and supporting students who struggle to access grade level appropriate complex text. And then we'll also give you some time to think about ideas for applying these concepts and these strategies to your own classrooms. So now I'm going to introduce my colleague who is joining us via video. So Carrie Swanson from Student Achievement Partners Literacy Team is going to talk with us a little bit about the research behind complex text.
So we are going to out the research behind the importance of using complex text in the classroom. So all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the 3 shifts in ELA instruction, which can be summarized. As use of complex text in academic language, use of evidence, and building knowledge. Today we're going to look closely at the first shift, using complex text. And the shift in practice is the first for a reason. It's a really big change from how reading instruction was done pre-Common Core. Some of the research that informed the development of the standards revealed that there's a significant gap in the complexity of what students read by the end of high school and what they're required to read in both college and career. In a study done by ACT in 2006, it was found that the complexity level of what students read at each grade level has dropped 4 years in the last half of the 20th century. The academic language of informational text is different than narrative literature. Exposing students to this enhances the breadth of their academic language, and lack of this exposure narrows it. So for too long, proficiency in reading was defined as skill in using reading strategies. And the Common Core puts the text at the center of lessons and demands that students achieve strategies in service of understanding the text, not mastering strategies in isolation. So a successful reader is going to possess the skills to navigate complex text and the challenges that they may encounter in them. We also know there's some realities about our students who aren't accessing appropriate grade level text. Stanovich called this the Matthew effect, the variation of the fact that over time the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Our proficient readers are starting off each year at a higher point than our non-proficient readers, and therefore gaining more each year. So without opportunities to counteract this effect, the gap is going to grow and grow. There's an example here of this that can be found just in looking at the words in the level readers for students in the same 5th grade class. Take a minute to look at what the below, the on, and the above level readers are exposed to from their level text. Consider what happens when this sort of gap is reinforced throughout the school day, the school year, over a child's education. So the list here is what we know about what makes a text complex. Complex text can contain any and all combinations of these features. We know that the complexity level is determined by quantitative and qualitative measures, and that students who struggle with reading almost always have gaps in their vocabulary and their ability to deal with more complex sentence structure. This is really well documented in research. Too often, less proficient students are given text at their level where they don't see these features listed here. Though this is done for the kindest of reasons, it has disastrous consequences. So we have close reading as a way of supporting students in working with these complex texts. Keep in mind what close reading actually is. It requires prompting students with questions based on those things that make the text challenging. It's not thinking aloud through those challenges, but helping students navigate their way. Virtually every standard is going to be activated based on what the text is bringing. And the questions that students are asked when they're text-dependent and text-specific will require that they give evidence. So today we're talking about how to scaffold complex text rather than supplant it. We know simply putting harder text in front of students won't alleviate the academic gaps that are in your classroom. However, there are ways in which teachers and educators can prepare in order to alleviate some of those challenges and support all students in accessing the rich opportunities that complex text offer. Adrian will be leading you all through an example of how to scaffold a text and provide support while reading within the first read, throughout subsequent reads, and after reading, supporting that while the kids are reading rather than before, so that they're truly achieving the intention of Standard 10. We want you to take a minute now and answer this question. What prevents teachers from using complex text with all students? And what hesitations do you have about this practice?
Great. So now that we've heard from Carrie, please take a minute to answer the question that she just asked. What prevents teachers from using complex text with all students? What hesitations do you have about this practice?
Great, so we got many more than I can keep up with, great responses to this question. And so just to share some of the things that you all posted, we'll keep on working on sharing some comments with you all, but just to give you some highlights, there were a lot of people who, put in the obvious, it's just too hard for kids. Many of you used the word fear specifically. They're afraid what's going to happen to the struggling students if you do bring complex text into the classroom. Many people said that one of the reasons why there's resistance to bringing complex text into the classroom is because they want students to understand the text. So I'm sure Adrian's going to talk to us a little bit about that, this idea that those aren't necessarily, you're not making a choice to sacrifice understanding. That wouldn't be our intention when you're bringing complex text into the classroom. A lot about, hey, it's hard to do this because we have a diversity of ability levels in our classroom. And also, several of you commented that in order to do this well, the teacher needs a degree of confidence in understanding both the text and students in their classroom. And so at this point, I would like to introduce you all to Adrienne Williams, who is one of our core advocates in our network. And she is going to share with us some of the strategies that we use for scaffolding. Adrienne is a curriculum management manager in the Center City Public Charter School System in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us, Adrienne.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Before we jump into the strategies, I did want to touch a little bit on your responses to that question, particularly around the fear and the hesitation you have around putting complex text in front of students because it's challenging. And I want to push back on that a little bit. That's exactly why we need to put it in front of them. When we start this work about scaffolding complex text and putting it in front of children, we have to come from a standpoint in which we believe that all kids can get there and should get there. No matter how complex the text is, it's our job as educators to figure out how to make it accessible. And when we don't, and we don't give them that opportunity to engage with that text, like as Carrie showed in the research, that has a real impact on their learning and their growth, not just while you have them, but in the years throughout their education. So I encourage you to take that chance. It's scary to try something new. You don't want to put something in front of a child and have them look at you with fear in their eyes, like they aren't going to be able to do it. So I'm hoping that these strategies will be able to give you some concrete action steps to really give all of your students the opportunity to engage with complex text in a really meaningful way. So let's get started. All right, so before you can even think about the specific strategies that you're going to be using with kids, you really need to think about the text. And this is whether you're working with kindergarten through 12th grade, you always start with your text in mind. And I know as good teachers, you all read the text before you put it in front of children. You plan with it. But the analysis that I'm going to push you to do is at a little bit deeper level. So I'm going to be using the text Spiders by Gail Gibbons as my example, just to what this analysis may look like. There is a handout that has the actual text of Spiders by Gail Gibbons, and also another handout that will lay out all the strategies. So as I go through, don't worry about trying to write everything down that you see on the slide. You will have a reference available at the end. So beginning with the text, you want to get to know your text very specifically in terms of the 4 different features. Reading through, you want to determine the meaning or the purpose behind the text, how is it structured, the language, and the knowledge demands. By doing this kind of analysis, you'll be able to pinpoint exactly where students are going to struggle. Without knowing that, you won't be able to make really intentional decisions around what scaffolds or strategies to use. So really get to know your text using these 4 different components, and it will help you decide where to spend your time and where your kids should spend your time. So once you've completed your analysis, we'll move on to thinking about the reader and the task. Next slide, please. There we go. So once you know your text, you really have to think about who's going to be reading it and what are they going to be using it. How are they going to be using it? So you want to connect the analysis you did to specifically what kids are going to do with it. You want to think about the questions you're going to be asking, the tasks in a way that get them to access that part that you identified that was challenging. So for example, with this text Spiders, in the analysis it showed that the structure was complex and the knowledge demands could be tricky. So I might think about the students I have who are going to struggle with that, and then create my questions and think about my task that's going to help them access that particular challenge. It's not about guiding them through by thinking aloud for them or giving them the answer. You really want to lay out your questions and your tasks as clues. You're laying kind of a trail of breadcrumbs that will get them to understand the challenging parts of the text without giving it away. You want to make sure that the cognitive lift stays on your students. So once you've analyzed the text, you've thought about your readers and the tasks they're going to do, an easy strategy that you can use before they start reading is to annotate the text with a defined purpose for reading. This helps individual students who struggle to carry meaning across a text, and it gives them a frame from which they can take in and connect the information from the text. So if you look at the questions under the independent reading side, it helps orient students to why they're reading it. So they don't go in and they're not just looking at words on a page. They're not just skipping through looking at pictures or skipping through because they don't understand. You're really making sure that they attend to what's on the page with that clear purpose. For read aloud, it's the same thing, except that you might be putting it on an anchor chart to guide the read aloud for the whole class. So that's one strategy that you can set up before reading. The next strategy, providing a student-friendly glossary of key vocabulary, allows students to independently use tools to make their own meaning when they come across these words in a text. We don't want to just always give them the definition. By having a glossary that they can reference as needed, it's very helpful, especially for English language learners who may have vocabulary gaps. And they can also use them when they're talking or writing about a text as well. For read aloud, it's important to note that if you're pre-teaching vocabulary, you want to choose words that students won't be able to get the definition from reading, just to make sure that they still are practicing that skill of getting vocab in context while they read. And if the vocab doesn't lend itself to that, then go ahead and pre-teach them. So before reading, we have set the purpose, and we have a student-friendly glossary of key vocabulary. Now, during your initial reading, it's really important that you give students an opportunity to have an uninterrupted reading of the text that first time. It provides time for students to enjoy the book, to hear it being read fluently, and to get a sense of the whole text. A lot of students who struggle to access complex text can access it when it's presented in either listening to it or by read aloud. A lot of times we don't think about that option. We might think about changing the text and putting an easier text in front of them. But when we do that, they miss out on the vocabulary exposure, like Carrie pointed out in those leveled readers, that would be in the high-level text. They're missing out on the knowledge building that might be missing from that more complex text. So stay the course. Once you've selected your text, find a way for them to have an uninterrupted reading. During your initial read, a strategy that I have found really important with my students is allowing students time to discuss or write about the text after they just read or heard it. It not only provides an opportunity for students to really synthesize what they've heard, to ask questions of each other, to bounce ideas back and forth, but it gives you, the teacher, an opportunity to collect data. By listening to their conversations, by looking at their writing, you'll be able to see, what stuck with them, what challenges did they still have, what might you focus on in future reads, and using the sentence starters, reflecting, making it a real collaborative experience definitely helps in that. After you've read it the first time, you want to go back and give them an opportunity to do close reading. Like Carrie said earlier, close reading really gives them an opportunity to dive deeply into the text and spend time working on those complex aspects. So when chunking the text and creating the questions can actually be a differentiation tool in and of themselves, as long as you vary them. They can connect back to a challenging portion of the text to push students to gain a stronger understanding. And remember, they don't always have to be those higher level inferential questions. If you look under the independent reading example and that series of questions that focus on the diagram, the first question is, how many parts does a spider's body have? It's an orient question. It's really small, low level, but it gets kids an opportunity to orient themselves to that page, which has a complex diagram, and it sets them up to answer the sequence of questions that through answering them, by the end, they'll have a really good understanding of that diagram. So think about how you can start small and work towards more complex questions, focusing on that one chunk of text. And again, remember, you can do this whether it's a trade book like the one here. You can chunk out sections of, Lincoln's inaugural address. It doesn't matter what the text is, as long as you're very purposeful around how you chunk it and how you design and sequence those questions. So after or between readings,
Text cues are a great way to get kids back in the text in a way that really makes their time with the text efficient. A lot of times when I would direct my students back to the text, they get caught up on their, their favorite part or what was most interesting, and it would have nothing to do with the questions they were supposed to answer. So providing a text cue, whether that be a paragraph or a line number, a section to reference, a heading, it orients them back to the text where the evidence they need to find is located. The list is still on them to find the evidence, to make sure it's the appropriate evidence, but you have cued them into where they should be looking. So I know that was fast, but remember you'll have a handout that lists all of those strategies and more. So now, just reflecting on that, we'll jump into a question.
Thanks. So our question is, which of these strategies do you want to try first in your classroom? Please use the question tab used previously to answer this question.
So, boy, lots and lots and lots of great ideas, and a lot of you, I think everything, I've been reading comments, everything from lots of people really loving the student-friendly glossaries, chunking texts, developing sets of text-dependent questions, anchor charts. I think some people worrying about like how this happens within the framework of a classroom. I think this is just, something that you need to practice and get good at. Not every single day, every single time, but you have to start somewhere, and I think it seems like many of you are enthusiastic about doing that, and so here's a good point where I'll remind you, like one of the reasons why we want you to do a little bit more than just, hey, think about something that you heard Adrian or Carrie say that really resonated with you. Hopefully some of this stuff that you guys have submitted in the question box are things that you intend to follow up on, and so we really encourage you to at least try, one thing that you heard about today, if not more. And of course, I'm going to remind you here to share that experience with us on the Instructional Advocacy Action Forms that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Sandra. So we're now going to listen to Carrie one more time, talk to us a little bit about how you can apply these things that the strategies and tools that Adrian has talked about to your own context, including some more resources that are available to you.
So you all have just gotten a chance to look at scaffolds that teachers can use in real life and how they can apply them to support students in accessing complex text. We want to provide you with a few more resources so that you can apply this work to your practice. We're going to go through some tools and resources that we have on Achieve the Core, and Adrian's going to lead you through some do's and don'ts for instruction. First of all, on our Aligned blog, there are the blog posts that led to today's work, both the Supporting All Learners with Complex Text piece that I wrote, and Adrian's reflections on using core knowledge language arts with Read Aloud. And then Student Achievement Partners has a Strategies for Supporting Struggling Readers handout. You got to see some of those strategies applied to the work that Adrian was going through. There are many more strategies that you may want to try in your classroom listed on that document that's also in your handout. On our website, we have a lot of resources for supporting qualitative text analysis. This is a practice like any other teacher practice. It takes time, but as you make it a habit, it can really help you to isolate the features of the text that you are using and consider which scaffolds would be most worthwhile for your students and the complexity that the text brings. These tools are under our planning and resources on text complexity. If your curriculum doesn't include opportunities for all students to engage with high-quality, high-level text, there are resources on achievethecore.org that can help you. Our closed reading lessons, for example, provide models for all grades. The Read Aloud project lessons are banks of K-2 lessons that use popular trade books and have text-specific questions included. And the Basal Alignment project has the same thing for upper elementary school. There should be resources that match your classroom needs and your grade level needs. And another tool that might support your work is the Academic Word Finder. This resource lets you enter your text directly into the tool, select the grade level, and see a list of words and their definitions. This can help you identify Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary words that your instruction may need to target.
Great. So Carrie shared a little bit about the tools and resources with you, and all of those can be found at achievethecore.org. And in addition, at the end, I'll just remind you again that at the end of this webinar tonight, you'll be receiving an email with this slide deck in it, and so you'll be able to look up any of those resources. So now we're going to hear one more time from Adrienne about just a few more reminders of do's and don'ts for scaffolding complex text for students.
Alrighty, we're going to start with some do's, and let me just preface this by connecting back to what Sandra said about just picking one thing and trying it. A lot of you in the beginning of this webinar mentioned that it was hard and scary to put this kind of text in front of kids who you know are going to struggle with it. But I really push you to just dig in, pick one thing. Use how it goes, whether it goes well or it doesn't, as data to then try something new. So jumping into the do's, like we mentioned before, provide an audio recording or have the text read aloud. Provide those text cues to really orient them to the piece of text you want them to examine closely. Pre-teach vocabulary, but only that vocabulary that cannot be defined through reading the text. Build knowledge and vocabulary by using a less complex text prior to the complex text you want to read them, with this caveat. Make sure they get to the complex text. You don't want to just put the simpler text in front of them and never get them to the complex text. One of the most important scaffolding strategies are those text-dependent questions and making sure they're carefully sequenced to get kids towards that big understanding that you want them to get out of the text. Provide an opportunity to reread so they get more time with the text. And like I said before, chunk it, give them easier to manage sections where they can spend a lot more time and go deep. Now for some don'ts. Do not simplify the text. The whole point around this is making sure kids are getting challenging text and they're learning the habits that allow them to access it. If you simplify the text, they're never going to get that practice and it's not going to help them grow. That being said, don't use the complex text as homework or unguided classwork. It's not meant to be something that they struggle through on their own, especially at home. Don't expect them to answer text-dependent questions silently and independently. We've already acknowledged that it's hard. Don't make it harder by structuring the task to be done in isolation. Don't remove or change the complex language or vocabulary. Those are exactly the things that all of our learners, especially our struggling learners, need to be exposed to. Don't give away the meaning or the big idea of the text. Again, your job is to lay the breadcrumbs. It's to set the foundation so that they can get to that big idea or that challenging piece on their own, you don't want to steal their aha moments. And lastly, don't give them a summary. The idea is for them to take this complex text and make meaning of it. If you give them a summary, it takes that opportunity away because you've shortened it and you've basically told them what it's about. So remember, in all of this, you don't want to do anything that's going to take that cognitive lift off of students and make it easier.
Thanks, Adrienne. So now we have a poll. Where do you learn about specific strategies for meeting the needs of all learners in your curriculum? Take a few moments and select the poll. Select the answer. All right, thank you everyone for taking our poll. It looks like the majority of people receive strategies from their school or district professional learning, including district and school coaches. Thank you so much.
Great. So now we are going to move on. We have quite a bit of time left, which is exciting because I've already seen lots of questions come in directed towards our core advocate guest, Adrian. So we're going to give all of you a few minutes to write your questions that you would like her to answer. And unfortunately, because Carrie Swanson wasn't able to join us in person tonight, she's not going to be able to answer your questions. But if you have specific questions for Carrie or the literacy team at Student Achievement Partners, feel free to ask them as well, and we will let them know what types of questions educators out in the field have around this work. So I'm going to actually just, while you're all typing questions, start with a first question that I read a little bit ago for Adrian and let her answer that, and feel free, everybody else, to write in questions for her. So Adrian, one of the questions that already came in was, when you say read aloud, is it all together or just the teacher with students following along in their books?
It can be both. So, yeah, it can be. It depends on the grade level and then the purpose of the read aloud. So in my class, I had an instructional assistant, and so we split the class. I had the majority, probably 2/3 of the students. She had another third, and we both read aloud. Sometimes we would give kids portions of the text. Other times it would just be kind of a listening and learning experience. In the older grades, the intermediate grades in middle school, I've seen it done where the teacher's reading aloud, kids have the book and are following along with the teacher. I've seen it done where it's small group reading and they're just listening. So it can be done in a variety of ways. It really just depends on what students you have and what the purpose of that read aloud is. If it's just to deliver content and build knowledge and vocabulary, then listening is fine. But you do want to make sure that they also get experience with the text in front of them as well.
Great. And Adrian, one other question that I saw written more than once was, how long should you spend on one book or one text? How long typically do you spend on one text and unpacking that in close reads and everything?
Sure. So it depends on your curriculum. In our district, we use core knowledge language arts, and so there's a new read aloud every day. So we've had to be creative in how we fit rereads in. But with the text sets that we use, we spend 3 to 4 days on one text, reading different selections and doing rereading for different purposes. So it depends on what curriculum you have and how flexible you can be with your time. But short answer, I would recommend spending at least 2 to 3 days on one text for elementary. If you're reading a novel, obviously you want to spend more time.
Can I just add to that also, Adrian, which is I think it's like one of these old mindsets that we have, that it's like, how many titles do we get through in a year? And one of the things that I know many of the teachers that we work with who have kind of committed to some of these strategies is that the strategies themselves can help students, their struggle in accessing an element of complexity with one text can help them become stronger in the next text. And so sometimes, those early investments of spending more time going slower on an initial text doesn't necessarily mean that that's the same pace that you'll address every complex text in. So one of the ways that we often talk about this in a slogan type format, if you will, is that what we want to see is students becoming increasingly independent with increasingly complex text. So if every time you put a complex text in front of your students, the teacher's the one doing all of the work, all of that is happening and the students aren't getting stronger, it's probably not a good fit. And you need to either think about different scaffolds and think about different texts that work better. But the idea is that the students should be getting stronger. So I know we all kind of have experience probably or can imagine systems where it's how many titles do you get through in a year. But I think both Adrian and Carrie said it in the presentations tonight. This requires a degree of patience and commitment, and you will see the benefits when students are given that time and space to make those connections and demonstrate their ability to persist, just like we ask you all to persist as well.
I agree. I think it also gives students a bit of their own self-efficacy when they've been able to make it through a really complex text once, and you give them the opportunity to get better and better. I saw my first graders, but by the end of the year, they were reading books that you probably shouldn't have put in front of first graders, but they could do it because they had so much experience with complex text. They could pick up a book they've never seen before that was above grade level and readily employ strategies to access it.
Great. So I will go ahead and ask one more question that I've seen come up a couple of times. Maybe you could speak a little bit longer, Adrian, about the idea of students not answering questions independently. There were a couple people that asked, is it ever appropriate to have students answer the text-dependent questions independently? And why would you not have students do that if they're reading independently? So maybe a little bit more about how you talked about having students discuss and answer questions collaboratively.
Sure. So the idea is you want to make sure they've had enough time in the text and with the text to develop the vocabulary, the background knowledge, the language that they need to really respond to a worthy question. As they're going through different rereads or even reading together the first time, you don't want them to do it alone unless the idea is you just want to see what they got out of the text. But I'd recommend doing that if it's one of the first times you're reading a text as a discussion, so you can get a wider spread of data and hear from everyone. And kids often, we don't want to be the only holders of knowledge. Kids can pick up on things from each other, sometimes much faster than they can pick up from adults. So we want to give them that opportunity to discuss and answer those questions to be targeted back to the text or to a piece of evidence, not just by us, but also by their peers. So you just want to make sure you're balancing the ways in which they're responding to those text-dependent questions. You don't want it to always be independently. Definitely, that is a measure of data. You want to be able to see what individual students can do, but also give them the opportunity to do that with their peers, with their groups. In elementary, we did that a lot through text-dependent questions, through turn-in talks, and then we'd share out. Often we would have a meatier question that we would debate at the end of a read and have everyone, find their best evidence, go back and counter with their peers. So it's really about making those speaking and listening standards come alive through analyzing and reading that complex text, and providing the opportunity for kids to learn from each other, not just you. But that's not to say don't ever have them answer them independently and silently. If you need that data as a formative assessment, by all means, go for it. Just make sure to balance it with other opportunities as well.
Great. Sandra, we had one question that maybe you could speak to a little bit. So there was one person who wondered about reviewing those resources again that are available on the website and where they might be found. So maybe you could speak just a little bit to the 3 categories that are on our website and how to find those lessons, and sample resources.
You navigate to Achieve the Core, and I know when we do these webinars, we have people who are new to our network and new to our resources, and people who for whom this is old hat. And so lots of you asking great questions about things like, hey, how do you determine text complexity? How do you write good questions? And I tried to keep up with many of those questions in the question box. But the way that our website is in fact organized, and believe me, we've done lots of user testing and teacher feedback, you guys know best how these things are used, is to navigate and look. And so we have 3 categories of resources on our site. One is professional learning, and in that area, we actually have lots of PowerPoint presentations, activities, all annotated. So if what you wanted to do is go back and share this information, a lot of which was shared tonight on the webinar, with a PLC, with a group of teachers that you lead, what have you, there are lots of resources for that in the professional learning part of our website. There's also a second facet of our website called Planning and Reflection. And here's where we start talking about what does this mean in practice? Like if you went into a classroom to give feedback or to do some self-reflection, what would it look like when this kind of good instruction is happening? So we have some guides around that. And then we also have, and here's where you'll find the things around text complexity, text-dependent questions, and so on. And so that's in the Planning and Reflection section of our website. And then if you go to the third part, which is classroom resources, this is where you'll find exemplar lessons, student writing samples. We have some really powerful mini assessments that often pair up with our literacy lessons so that you read a text, and we have a very thorough, including questions and scaffolding strategy, example lessons, and then there are also some assessments that pair with those very same texts. So, we try to make our website easily navigable, and I really would encourage those of you who haven't yet taken the time to explore, to do yourself a favor and schedule yourself some time to really do that. I think you'll be quite pleased with the resources that you find there. So we have a couple more minutes. I'll just kind of take some quick questions as I'm finding them, if that's okay. One quick question is, what's the Academic Word Finder? So the Academic Word Finder is a really cool tool that we have that allows you to copy and paste a piece of text up to 28,000 words, select which grade level you intend to teach that text at, and it will literally highlight for you which are the words that are at grade level, above grade level, and below grade level. Again, all with your own human judgment of the students who you have in front of you. But it's a very useful teacher-requested tool that we built about, like, hey, can you tell me which words I should focus on? And so it's a really good starting point for that. All right.
Great. So we are going to wrap up our webinar for this evening. As always, you're welcome to continue engaging with us via Twitter and emailing any of the members of the Field Impact team with questions. And we always love getting feedback from all of you. And really, many of the tools like the Academic Word Finder are developed with our student achievement partners literacy team and actually tools for our math team as well, because of feedback from educators in the field about what is working and what's not working. So please continue to engage with us. We also would like to invite you to join our webinar next month, which will have a similar theme for math. It's going to be around supporting all learners in working with grade level mathematics. As always, it's on the first Wednesday of the month, so March 1st. And the link to register is on the slides, and you'll receive the slides in an email after this webinar tonight. So you can, this is hyperlinked, and you can just click on it. So we hope to see many of you there, and hopefully you'll join us. And that's all. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I just want to thank Adrienne again for all of her knowledge and wisdom around this topic, and we hope you all have a good evening.